Scott, let me ask you this then. What is the disadvantage that is making people go away from using tables? What is the advantage to using CSS over tables?
The advantage to using CSS is that it is one file across the site. Okay, occasionally you want to split your CSS into multiple files, but let me open up the Miles Media corporate site, which is a better example of this. The idea is that you create an HTML file that defines units of content. So we have spans for inline formatting, and then we have a unit called a div, which behaves like a paragraph. And because we're on the Miles Media Network here, just to start with this.
Obviously, it's time.
So,
like time is what I'm thinking of. That's what I'm thinking in relation to time.
It's because if you want to make a change to this, say you have an error message on your site, and somebody fills in the form wrong, and they get an error message, and it's normally formatted in red, and you have that appearing on 50 pages on your site. You redesign your site, and you decide it should be formatted in purple now. You have to go and change that in 50 places, or you have to go change it in one place.
Okay. So it's like if Visit Florida decided that they didn't want to be orange anymore, they wanted all their text to be blue.
Right, you have to go
change it in one place. Well, you change it in Visit Florida, you have to change it on all of it, right?
Right. Whereas
it doesn't use
CSS, you can
Oklahoma,
change
for example, you can change all the text on the site just by clicking the style sheet.
Okay.
A site that is any site is going to involve some level of combination of CSS and HTML formatting. There's ultimately no real getting away from that, unless your site is very simple. But here's an example of this. We have divs, and we have a div is a division of text. It's a unit of text. It's similar to a paragraph, and you can put divs inside of divs, but a div by itself doesn't have any formatting on it. You have to apply an ID to it or a class to it, which defines what it's going to be called, and then you create a CSS document that contains that formatting up here. And I don't know how IE displays them, so let's find out. Apparently it doesn't display them. Oh, it wants to open it in a Photoshop. A Dreamweaver. You can get away from that in Chrome and Firefox. They're not all integrated. You're going to say something?
As far as tables, though, one reason to get away from tables is accessibility. Some readers, they get jumbled up by the table, especially if they have nest tables for blind people when they have sight readers that go and read text through. Depending on the table order, it can actually read them in the wrong order, and it makes it real difficult for blind people to view your site, as you said.
Mm-hmm. As far as programmers are concerned, the idea is to separate the structure of the page from the layout of the page, and so the structure of the elements. But that's really a fine point for people who are taking this in an academic sense. Real-world applications, those of us in this room just making web pages, it's not an important distinction to make.
Well, it almost sounds like it should be part of the conversation before we start a project on how it's built, and not necessarily to the developer's preference, just because
that's what I was getting
if you build something and then it doesn't have the flexibility to make changes, it's not necessarily fair to the client or whoever put the business deal together that it was built in a certain way that would take 5 times longer. So I guess looking down at the scope of the project, like you're saying, building it with the intention of what it may do later.
And we had a request from New Hampshire to be 508 compliant, which we can't do altogether. That's the accessibility that you were talking about. And so I read about it, and we did what we could to make their meeting site as close as we could to that. Like our intranet would be exactly compliant because it doesn't have any pictures, it just has text, and it's easy to figure out the hierarchy if you have a reader. Well, we did the best that we could by using real text for several reasons on the navigation. Their main site has pictures for the navigation, so the reader
can use alt tags. It reads alt tags.
Yeah, as long as they did that. We didn't build their main site, so I don't know if it contains alt tags for that. But we tried to make it as compliant as we could within the within the budget and within the
Right.
constraints of.
Sometimes it takes an overhaul, really, to
Yeah.
be able to do that.
And it's good for search engines too, to have
Right.
the navigation as text.
That's the main reason we did it, and we had to sell them on that, and their
Mhm.
agency, and they bought it, because they can't promote that site, they don't have any money to say, visit this URL, it has to be organic.
Mhm. When you get into PHP, also there's an additional level of, there's a PHP script that does all of the intelligent work that goes and connects to the database and gets the information out of the database, and maybe it connects to another server like a weather server, whatever. It accumulates all this information, and then it has to do some HTML work to actually spit out something that your browser can read, and then that HTML might have CSS as another separate layer. And there's ways to separate this out, and there's advantages to separating them out to make more organized code, but it does make it harder to maintain, and really the benefit that I've always heard for that is that it makes it easier to redesign later. That you can simply change out the HTML layer without changing the PHP layer or reprogramming that at all. That's great, but how many times do we redesign a site that is just a simple rescan? It's an ironic statement for me to say that because Visit Ford is about to get a rescan that I'm going to do. But anyway, it's very rare that we do that. Usually when we redesign a site, we completely reprogram it. We have a whole new content library. We have whole new PHP systems in there. We have to rebuild everything.
Well, we have done it a couple times for the smaller DMOs, like
Mhm.
Sarasota and Naples, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's becoming a little bit more popular. Maybe that's a function of the economy. I
Yeah.
don't know.
That can happen sometimes. New people come in, they want to put their personal stamp on it at the CVB, but without having a budget to really redesign it or really improve it. Or maybe we just got it right the first time and you can't really improve it all that much, so let's just change the layout a little bit. And so there are advantages to separating the layout of something from the structure of it, but ultimately it's going to involve more hours to build and more hours to maintain, and you just have to decide, is it worth it in the budget when you start the project? Is this a site that's going to get changed often?
And what about Drupal? Like we use Drupal for the summer site for St. Pete and for the Super Bowl site, and those were both, they weren't microsites by any stretch of the imagination. They were, 25, 26 pages, so they were small, but they were big enough to take, a good amount of time to do. And the reason that we use Drupal is because of the theming.
Mhm.
And that's like another layer on top of CSS, right? So,
Mm-hmm. It's collections of CSS that will apply to the page. But Drupal is the same thing. It has PHP that does the work, and then that is placed into an HTML template right, that has all the formatting in it, and it simply has little tags saying put this paragraph here, put this image here, that is defined in PHP. And then there's a layer of CSS on top of that can be done for each page. And so it starts getting complicated, but that's when you're getting to a professional level of complication. So, to get back to keeping it simple, anybody have any questions, again, about tables or some of the code in tables or anything? Tables are really great for just simple displays like this. That's what they're intended for, and we have use for this sort of thing all the time. So get used to it, and if you hear use CSS, don't use tables, you don't have to listen to that. I hope no developers are going to listen to this recording. All right, a couple of other tags that will be useful. I mentioned divs already. If you're going to get into CSS, you can create a div, just put some text inside of it. By itself, the div doesn't contain any formatting. It'll just show your text on the screen, and then you can apply your formatting to the div. You get the idea of this by now. If we're going to color that red. The important things about divs is that you can apply a class to it, and then this class can have its definitions. So you can call the class anything you want to.
yes, I know. Rick Fall made one for the summer site, and it was called Div Class Sparkles.
Oh.
So I was like, put some sparkles on it. So he named it Sparkles, and I saw it in the code. I'm like, oh my god, that's hilarious. And it was a subhead. We had a main headline for the article pages, and then we had a subhead. Sparkle. And it wasn't, sparkly enough, so.
Oh, what am I doing
So he
wrong?
made Div Class Sparkles.